Readings from Meditation and Spiritual Life, Chapter 26, Practice of the Presence of God. First point, keeping the mind on a higher plane. In spiritual life, it is not enough if we spend 1 or 2 hours in the morning and evening in meditation. Something of the meditative mood must be maintained throughout the day. There must be an undercurrent of thought about the divine, even when we are engaged in our daily duties of life. This prevents the rising of impure thoughts and greatly helps in concentration when we sit down for meditation. Practice of the presence of God must supplement our daily meditations, and if done properly, it is by itself an intense spiritual practice. It is equal to several hours of meditation done without concentration. In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks Krishna about the characteristics of a liberated man. What is the purpose of this sort of cataloging the characteristics of a perfect devotee, which you find repeated in many places in this book and also in other spiritual texts? Shankara, in his commentary on the second chapter of the Gita, explains this point. He says that the characteristics of a liberated man are to be regarded as the virtues or disciplines to be practiced by the imperfect. What is a strenuous discipline for the struggling soul is an embellishment to the perfect. Hence, the importance of knowing the conduct and character of an advanced soul. The main point to note in all these instructions is the importance of keeping the mind on a higher plane always. The mind should never be allowed to come down. This happens when you forget the supreme ideal and get absorbed in worldly affairs. Since works and duties are unavoidable, these are to be converted into means for keeping contact with the divine. Unless one does it, a little japa and meditation done in the morning and evening do not help much. We should remember the Lord always, and the only way of doing this is to connect everything we do and think to the divine. It is very dangerous to let the mind remain vacant or to brood over the past. If we allow the mind to remain unoccupied, it will go on thinking useless thoughts, brooding over the past experiences. All these do no good to anybody. If you get into such mood, at once take up reading some good book or do some selfless service to somebody. You will find that mood will soon pass. Otherwise, if you just sit and brood over the past, you will not only waste time but also produce self-created obstacles. The importance of serious studies in religious life can never be overemphasized. They are very important for most of the aspirants. It is presumptuous to think that studies are no longer necessary for you, that you can attain everything through your meditation. Meditation no doubt helps in opening up the higher centers, but all the mental and vital energies cannot be made to flow through these higher centers. A large quantity of surplus energy is left at the lower centers, and if this is not channelized through some creative work, it may lead to unnecessary disturbance of the mind. Studies and selfless work should be looked upon as a form of spiritual practice. They should form a part of any comprehensive scheme of spiritual life. They should not be left out as unnecessary or useless. If you are able to do something creative at other times, you will never feel the monotony of life. Otherwise, especially for the beginners, spiritual life itself may become an intolerable monotony. Our spiritual life is to be judged by the type and frequency of the thought of the divine that arises in our mind in the course of the day. Just sitting down for an hour's meditation once or twice a day is not enough. In the midst of our daily work and duties, the thought of God must constantly bubble up. That is a real spiritual life. Otherwise, you remain spiritual only for an hour or two a day. The rest of the time, you are no different from an ordinary worldly person. But of course, this needs conscious struggle for a long time. Unpleasant situations and people cannot be avoided, and these disturb our mind. So you must learn to connect them also to the divine. Find some place for the so-called wicked people and unfortunate circumstances in the larger plane of divine existence. Then usually you will discover that the people do not look wicked, nor the situations so unfortunate after all. Through steady practice, you will be able to throw your ego into the background, bring the divine to the forefront, and make him dominate your thought life. It is the clinging to our little self or ego that is the major problem in spiritual life. This should be attenuated. It is your attitude towards yourself that is perhaps the greatest obstacle to your spiritual progress, not so much other people and circumstances. Our next point is continuity of practice. Through practice, you will be able to repeat the Lord's name or chant a hymn or prayer and think of Him while your hands are busy with work. It is in this way that you will be able to transform work into worship and be nearer to God. Prayer and meditation at fixed hours are most essential for spiritual progress, but that is not enough. Something of the prayerful and meditative mood is to be continued during the period of work also. It is then that work attempted to be done in the spirit of consecration becomes a form of spiritual practice, as much effective as prayer and meditation. Says a Hindu hymn, "All that I do, O Lord, is thy worship." Be very particular about your regular prayer and meditation, but also carry a little of the holy thought with you throughout the day. To the extent you succeed in filling up your idle moments with the Lord's name and thought, a tremendous spiritual transformation will take place in you, and you will be feeling the divine presence, love, and bliss in your heart more and more. Do not feel anxious about the ups and downs, which are inevitable for those who are following the spiritual path. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that tides are experienced in a river only when it is nearing the ocean. You should not worry about your moods. The mind has its ups and downs. But as you go on steadily with your japa and meditation and feel the presence of the One who never changes, you will have greater stability. Besides, your power of thinking and introspection also will increase. After a little japa and meditation, attend to your duties, but have something of the feeling that the infinite spirit dwells in your heart as the soul of your soul, just as He dwells in all beings. Think also that you and everybody else dwell in Him. Proceed in this way, and you will be able to feel more and more of the heart center, the point of contact between your soul and the infinite spirit. This in due course will give you great mental and physical stability. Next point is inner contact with the divine. Every spiritual aspirant must have a definite center of consciousness, a holy form that is Ishtadevata, and a holy name that is mantra for constant use. Further, just like the mariner's compass which constantly points towards the north, our mind must be fixed always on the holy form and the holy name in our center of consciousness. Every sadhaka must have a definite higher spiritual center for his consciousness. He must learn to remain in his center of consciousness always. This he can do easily if during his morning meditation he succeeds in fixing his mind there. If he is able to locate his real I there, it is easier for him to connect his objective consciousness to this central consciousness. The aspirant should see that he is always rooted deep in his center of consciousness. If our mind is uprooted from this spiritual center, it tends to strike roots somewhere else, and this can be very unsettling. Those who follow the path of jnana always try to hold on to the central I consciousness through constant self-analysis. They remain more balanced and do not feel long gaps of spiritual dryness. The Bhakta's case is different. He gives more importance to the form of his Ishtadevata, and when he cannot remember him, he feels miserable. Those who follow the path of devotion should learn to connect their individual consciousness with the consciousness of their Ishtam. When you do not feel the living presence of your Ishtam, your own consciousness loses its base, and you feel as if you are floating in the air without any support. Sometimes the aspirant succeeds in making the form of his Ishtam very vivid during his meditation, but he finds that he is unable to establish a proper contact with it. He is unable to connect his consciousness with that of the Ishtam. This brings profound disturbance and often a prolonged unsettlement. For days together, the aspirant lives in a sort of emotional vacuum. If temporarily you feel out of touch with your Ishtam Devata, please do not lose heart. Go on praying and doing your spiritual exercises and also your reading of scriptures. Wait with inner intensity, the inner contact will be restored and more deeply than before. Actually, our souls are always in contact with the divine, but since we are in the domain of the unconscious, we do not feel it. Our impurities, inner impulses, and fantasies keep us from rising to a higher plane of consciousness, where we can easily feel the divine contact. Hence, the great importance attached to the purification of mind in spiritual life. The main problem for modern people is that they do not feel intense love for their Ishtam and have not succeeded in establishing a proper relationship with him. If there is true love for the divine, the love tends to be expressed in work. Every form of work becomes an expression of the aspirant's adoration for the divine. Next point is overactivity and obstacle. There are some people who want to save the world without even knowing how to save themselves. Without solving your own problems, you cannot solve those of the world. This is the trouble with most fanatical reformers. They do not really know anything of themselves, and yet they want to reform others. Such is our perverse nature, that we go on multiplying work until it absorbs all our attention and energy. We should not multiply our duties unnecessarily. We should not run after work. We need a certain amount of leisure. We should always find time for our spiritual exercises and our devotions. Overactivity is an obstacle in spiritual life. Again and again, we come across the tendency in people to multiply work, especially in the West with its restlessness and aimless passion. Sri Ramakrishna always used to discourage the tendency in certain people to increase work, to increase their duties. It is an unbalanced mentality. It just shows restlessness and an attempt at escape. It is nothing praiseworthy. No human being can achieve anything without leisure well used. Most overactive people lack balance, have an abnormal psychology. The activity of a monkey intoxicated by alcohol and stung by a scorpion is nothing wonderful, and the activity of these people is just the same sort of half-mad, random activity for activity's sake. Then they come and complain, where is the time to do my spiritual practices? If only I had time, etc., etc. Restlessness is as bad as lethargy. Passion is as bad as dullness. So, activity of this kind is nothing to make a song about. And duty in such cases is just an excuse. Very often, duty is self-created as an excuse for one's own restlessness and lack of balance. We want to run away from ourselves and go on multiplying duties so that we can have a comfortable excuse for ourselves and for others. Real duty is something very different. Unnecessary social functions are everywhere for worldly-minded people. There is a lot of impurity in them. Never create such unnecessary work that does no good to yourself or to others. Those who have to struggle hard for their animal existence find it hard to turn to the divine. Those who can do so in spite of this struggle are very rare. Everyone needs leisure well employed. Always try to do the Lord's work through prayer, japa, meditation, and deep studies and other forms of spiritual practice. Try to have as much time as possible for these. Work should be done with perfect detachment and should be looked upon as a means, not as an end. The instrument also acts, and we should have the idea that we are instruments in the hands of the Lord while we act. Then our whole attitude will change, and our work too will become a part of spiritual practice of service to the Lord. Work is always to be directed towards the Lord. This must be our conscious attitude, whatever work we may happen to do. Thereby, certain kinds of work will have to be eliminated. The Bhagavatam says, that person is really dead, though alive, whose activity in this world does not tend towards dharma and thereby to renunciation and to the hallowed feet of the divine Hari. Our next point is work and worship. At first, the aspirant may feel some difference between work and worship, though he carries on both in a spirit of surrender. Then he finds that he is able to carry on his inner worship even in the midst of all his duties. Finally, all his work becomes a worship. At first, we must make our activities as selfless as possible by offering the fruits of our work to the divine. Later on, we learn to work as instruments in his hands. Our whole life then becomes one of undivided consecration. Work and worship must go hand in hand. Both effect the purification of our mind and help in the unfoldment of higher consciousness. They are to be looked upon as a twofold spiritual discipline, inseparable from each other. No man or woman should neglect his or her duties in the name of meditation. If we work remembering the Lord all the while, we may not need so much of private meditation. What is most important is that the aspirant should always be in touch with the divine in some form or other. One of the best means of achieving this is to repeat the mantra mentally even while engaged in routine work. Let the wheel of japa continuously turn within us. As Swami Brahmanandaji has advised us, always take the help of the sound symbol. Fill up your idle moments with the name of the Lord. Whenever any opportunity for service arises, we should take it up, and that ungrudgingly, otherwise the soul shrinks. Do not seek more work, but render service if there is any occasion. We grow through giving, not through receiving. The receiver must be a giver, the giver of something. Never allow yourself to become beggarly. Be detached, but be fully sympathetic. Render help wherever you can, but without attachment, realizing that you are not the agent. Sometimes we think that if we try to help others spiritually, that would be posing as a guru. that is not true if there is no feeling of vanity or superiority in us. It is service, and we should never allow ourselves to shrink from such service when the opportunity or need for rendering it arises. In order to convert work into worship, first of all, one should try to culture the spiritual mood with japa and meditation. When a person takes up a work, he cannot think of God all the time. So, let him remember Him at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the work, thinking that he is doing the work as a form of service to Him in order to please Him. As one succeeds in taking this first step, one can remember the Lord often, even in the midst of work. The mind has got two currents, the upper one and the lower one. Usually, the lower one is filled with useless thoughts. This undercurrent of the mind can be trained to think of the Lord as one performs the work allotted to one, and remembering at the same time that one is working for His sake. This prevents the work from becoming mechanical and also prevents the mind from being occupied with worldly thoughts. Sometimes, due to force of circumstances, one has to do an excess of work, but if one's mind is properly trained, one can still find it possible to think of God even in the midst of intense activity. For this, regular preliminary discipline is necessary. Now, how to make the mind feel convinced that the Lord is the only doer? Through work and worship, you must first realize the presence of the Lord, the soul of your soul, and then you can easily feel His will and His power that is working through your body and mind and through everything in this universe. This takes us to the ideal of dedication. The word means offering one's soul, mind, and body to the Supreme Spirit, praying to be an instrument in His hands for serving His cause, and trying to promote the welfare of all, and along with that, striving for the salvation of one's own self. The central idea should be to love and service God in man, and thus realize the highest goal of human existence. The service may be physical, intellectual, moral, or spiritual, according to the needs of those who come in close touch with us. As I have already said, along with work, one must also think of the Lord and offer all activities to Him. They alone become mechanical who forget the Lord and the goal of attaining Him and work like machines. The trouble is not so much with the quantity of work as with the inability to do it in a spirit of dedication to God. There cannot be any dedication unless the goal of self-realization is kept constantly in view and the little ego is sacrificed and merged in the divine consciousness. The person who says that in dedication one has to sacrifice everything and obey others, whether right or wrong, has not understood the spirit of dedication, or even if he has, is not able to express the ideal properly. As one succeeds in practicing real dedication, the ego is not so much killed as transformed. The individual consciousness is united with the divine consciousness, and the individual will becomes one with the divine will. One even feels that one's body is a part of the cosmic body. Such a person can never become mechanical. On the contrary, he leads a cosmocentric life instead of an egocentric one. Whatever be the nature of the work you may be doing, think that you are doing everything as a form of service to the Lord who dwells in you, in everybody. In the 18th chapter of the Gita, Lord Krishna says that one can attain spiritual illumination by worshipping the Supreme Spirit with one's duty. Any honest work, however humble, may be looked upon as a form of service to the Lord and thus can be performed with detachment. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.